welcome to another Golden Hawk video. My name is Golden Hawk, and today we're going to be reading part 3 of Jim the Wonder Dog by Marty Rhodes Figley. Now, the first two parts been exciting. Can't wait to see what's happening next. So I hope you enjoy this video. Remember to like, subscribe, and hit that notifications bell, and let's get right into this. Chapter 5, Hotel Star. When Mr. Sam discovered Jim's talents, he and his wife lived in Sedalia, Missouri, at the Lemoore Hotel. Later, Jim moved with his family to the Ruff Hotel in Marshall, Missouri. Although Jim performed amazing feats at both hotels, it was Marshall that had become known as his home. On any given night at the Ruff Hotel, Jim was usually the most highly anticipated visitor many an evening. The hotel guests gathered in the lobby just to catch a glimpse of Jim and to watch him answer Mr. Sam's questions. When Mr. Sam asked, "Can you show me the guest who is staying in room 14?" Jim would go and find the person in the crowd. Jim also found, at his master's request, the lady wearing the white dress and the man with only one hand. Guests wrote their requests on pieces of paper and handed them to Mr. Sam, who then posed them to Jim. Jim seemed to understand them all. Once, a woman gave Mr. Sam a request written in shorthand, a coded way to write quickly. But Mr. Sam didn't know shorthand, so instead of asking Jim the question, he showed the dog the paper and asked Jim to do whatever it said. The note requested that Jim find the man wearing rolled-down socks, and Jim did. A teacher in Marshall remembered. One evening, my friend asked Jim, what would he do if his pencil broke? Jim went over and put his foot on the pencil sharpener. The electrician at the Ruff Hotel remembered a time when a group of salesmen was gathered in the hotel lobby. Mr. Sam asked one of these men had the most loose change in his pocket. Everyone got money out of their pockets and started counting. Jim walked over and put his paw on a guy. That was the one who had the most money. Besides being good with numbers and colors, Jim was also reportedly an authority on who ate what. A grocery employee in Marshall told of a meeting of grocers held at the Ruff Hotel. Mr. Sam set up a table with various canned goods and vegetables. He said to the dog, "On the table is one can, and in that can is something that horses eat." The dog, without hesitation, walked to the table and laid his paw on the can of corn. Another witness of Jim's feats recalled, a man in the hotel lobby wrote a request for Jim in German. Mr. Sam did not speak German, but told Jim to do it. Jim left the hotel, went to the next-door drugstore, and stood by the woman there. When Mr. Sam asked what the man had said, he said he told Jim to go find his wife. And he did. Just how many languages did Jim understand? No one seemed to know, but only because no one ever thought to ask him. As the years passed, it became clear that Jim was especially good at finding the ladies. A Marshall resident recalled one occasion when Mr. Sam had Jim perform in the hotel lobby. He asked Jim to pick out the lady who had the most lipstick on. He went right past my aunt, who was a young lady at the time, and some of the other ladies, who turned right around, went back, sat down, and raised his paw. And the gosh truth was, she, his aunt, had more lipstick on than anyone. A beauty operator remembered waiting for a bus inside the Ruff Hotel. She was reading a magazine to pass the time. There was Jim the Wonder Dog sitting in front of me with a note in his mouth and his paw on my toe. I was so surprised. Mr. Sam told her to take the note from Jim, and she did. It said, "Where's the lady with the red hat on?" She was wearing a red hat. A retired Marshall school teacher remembered. We'd go into town once a month to buy groceries and feed. While my mother was shopping, my dad and I would go over to the hotel and watch Jim. Once, when I was wearing a navy and white sailor dress, Mr. Sam said, "Find the girl in the sailor dress." Jim came right over to me. At 6 years old, I felt I had gone over to another world. I could not believe it. It was something I will never forget. Jim didn't, on occasion, falter when given a command, and sometimes Mr. Sam's requests could confuse him, but only because he needed more specific information to follow through. Once, after being told to find the girl with the red bow in her hair, Jim just stood like a bump on a log until Sim realized two girls in the audience were wearing red bows. One had white dots on her red bow, the others was solid red. When Mr. Sam asked Jim to go to the one with the polka dot bow, Jim quickly found the right girl. Chapter 6, Enter the Scientists and Politicians. There were always people who doubted Jim's ability. Those people believed Mr. Sam was doing something to tip Jim off. Sometimes, to satisfy the skeptics, Mr. Sam would turn his back on Jim and give the request or go to another room before he asked a question. Mr. Sam told a newspaper reporter once, "Some say he moves on a single from me. Maybe he does, but I don't know what it is. In whatever way he gets information from me, he does get it and will point out anything I ask him. Either he has a human mind or I have a dog mind." Away from the crowds, Mr. Sam couldn't help wondering about Jim's abilities either. Was he clairvoyant? Did Jim understand human thought? It sure seemed like he did. Maybe there's a way to prove it once and for all. In early December of 1931, Mr. Sam and Jim traveled to the University of Missouri in Columbia to be tested by Dr. Sherman Dickinson, professor of agricultural education, and Dr. A.J. Durant, professor of veterinary science. More than 500 students gathered on the campus to see Jim take the tests. Paramount Movie Studios even sent a news crew to film the event. When it was time to start, Mr. Sam looked at Jim, and Jim looked back at Mr. Sam. Would the dog be able to follow directions in front of such a loud and lively crowd? They were about to find out. After being introduced, Mr. Sam asked Jim to go find a man who takes care of animals. Jim trotted right over to Professor Dickinson and tapped his leg with his paw. Now he had the crowd's attention. When asked, Jim picked out the letter O on the Paramount truck, and everyone clapped. Then different professors gave the hunting dog instructions in Italian, French, German, and Spanish. Mr. Sam, who didn't speak any of these languages, later said, "I had to know the meaning of each question before it was asked. Then I would say, 'Do what the gentleman tells you,' before Jim would stir an inch." Jim performed perfectly except for once. The boy he was asked to find slipped away from the crowd before Jim could reach him. When the tests were over, the students whooped and hollered in appreciation. Some demanded that the dog with horse sense be granted an honorary degree. Jim just sat calmly by his master's side. He seemed to know he had done well. Professor Dickinson declared Jim to be the smartest dog he had ever seen. After physically examining the setter, Professor Durant observed, "Jim is different from other dogs in that his eyes are more prominent and the middle portion of his cranium, skull, is very broad. Otherwise, he is much the same as a dog of ordinary intelligence." As far as Jim's talents were concerned, the veterinarian later said, "I am convinced that Jim possessed a supernatural power that may never come to a dog again in many, many generations." Still, there would be skeptics. A few years later, Jim was invited to perform before the members of the Missouri legislature in Jefferson City, the state capital. He did all the things asked of him, but one state senator was set on making a fool of Mr. Sam and his dog. That man requested that the state telegrapher be brought into the session. Then the senator wrote a message on a piece of paper and gave it to her. No one else saw it. As the telegrapher tapped the message out on the dots and dashes of Morse code, Jim watched. When the woman finished, he walked down the long aisle to a certain senator and put his paw on him. The message had requested that he find the senator who had just sponsored the St. Louis racehorse bill. That's what Jim had just done. Everyone, including the skeptical senator, was flabbergasted. I have permission from Road Runner Press to read aloud and post this video on YouTube. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Remember to like, subscribe, and hit that notifications bell for more videos, and I will see you next time.